Welcome to a new episode of Outside the Panels with your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes.
Welcome everyone to an episode of Outside the Panels. I'm your host, Johnny the Machine Hughes, and joining me this time is a writer who started off at indie books, then he went on Marvel, then he's back at indie books. One of my favorite writers and one of my favorite books from a few years back. I'm talking to Mr. Dennis Hopeless. Dennis, how's it going?
It's going well, Johnny. How are you?
I'm very well. Thank you so much for taking the time out to do this. I absolutely loved your work when I came across it on Spider-Woman, and I've been a fan since. So this is kind of like a bit of a fanboy moment for me. So
I really appreciate you having me on. We're trying to promote this book, and it was great. It's great to be here.
Good, excellent. Thank you very much. Right, so let's start at the top and work our way down.
Yes.
For those of us in the know, your surname, Mr. Hopeless, is a pen name. How on earth did you come up with such a idiosyncratic pen name?
I was very young, and I had it in my head that I wanted to have like a rock star name.
All right, okay.
And yeah, that's basically the only answer I've got. It's loosely based on the indie comic Hopeless Savages. I think that's where I got the idea originally, which is a secret I've never told anyone except for the writer of that book. I told her on a panel one time. And yeah, so I just picked the pen name when I was 22, and it's what I put on everything, and it's what everybody knew me as and has known me as. And then a few years ago, I went through a divorce, and I decided, well, I'm going to use my real name. I'm going to put my real name on everything now. Wow. And I asked Marvel to put it on in those books. And what that ended up doing is confusing the hell out of everyone, because I had built a brand, and now it's like I was changing the name of Sprite to lemon juice or something. So yeah, I did. The only book that it was ever only Hallam on was Sea of Stars, which is a book I did at Image with Jason Aaron. And half of the reviews credited me as the artist because they never heard of Dennis Hallam. No. And that's when I realized, okay, it's just Hopeless. So from now on, it's just Dennis Hopeless. That's my name. That's what we're using.
All right, okay, all right. Thankfully, it is Hopeless in name and not in nature, because I have to say, your work has brought a smile to my face on more than one occasion.
Thank you.
I used to like. I used to love the Batgirl book by Brian Q. Miller, the Stephanie Brown book.
Yeah.
Just because it was fun, it was a little bit lighthearted, it was a little bit off key for the rest of the Bat books. And I think that's kind of where your Spider-Woman book fit in. It was a little bit off key, it was a little bit less serious, especially after the change of costume and the change of style and the dynamic that changed on that. So really a bit of a fun book for me, definitely.
Yeah, we did that. Do you want to talk about Spider-Woman later? Or you want to
we'll bring Spider-Woman up later.
Okay. Sure.
We've got more important things to talk about than Spider-Woman,
yes,
haven't we? We've got, as you can see from our lovely background, we have this book to talk about. There we go, Heart Eyes, #1, which ships in August. So this is an advance.
Yeah, you get to read it really early.
Yeah, and I got to say, I thoroughly enjoyed it. So there you go. So tell everyone, what's the story behind the idea of this book then?
Yeah, Heart Eyes it's essentially a Lovecraftian post-apocalyptic Romeo and Juliet. So the world has been eaten by sanity-eaten monsters that have come from another realm and destroyed society, and humanity exists in tiny hidden pockets of like families and individuals who hide from the monsters that have taken over everything. And this young man and woman meet and start to fall for each other, but they live in a world where no one trusts anyone. So like he sees the girl of his dreams, and his family sees a manic pixie nightmare come to kill them all. And so that's where we start, and then things go super crazy with issue 2, and head in all sorts of crazy directions. But that's kind of the elevator pitch.
I imagine that the truth is somewhere between the two, but we'll have fun getting there. There are some influences in the book. You've mentioned Lovecraftian, If we think about movies for a second, I got a little bit of the Matrix in there, because it's like an alternative world.
Yeah.
Day of the Triffids.
Definitely, yeah.
And a bit of A Quiet Place, because The Quiet Place has that whole sort of like ensconced society in little bubbles that kind of have to work together as much as they dislike to.
Definitely. And there's a lot of I think you'll probably see a lot of post-apocalyptic fiction coming out now because of how everybody felt during COVID. So the things that were developed at that time are coming out now. And that was definitely on our mind. Victor and I worked together. Victor Ibanez, the amazing artist on the book. He and I worked together on Jean Grey back at Marvel a few years ago. And we always wanted to do a create-our-own book together, but I was always super busy and, it never got past the planning stage. And then right around the time Pencils Down happened during COVID, I had a lot of free time on my hands, and Victor posted, right, everybody did, right? And I was feeling very isolated and lonely and just terrified for the state of the world. And Victor posted this picture of Lupe, our main character, and then like a crazy squid monster. And I reached out and I'm like, what is this? Like, what are you doing a new book? What's this thing? And he's like, I don't know, it's just a drawing. Do you want to write something for it? So I think it's a combination of Victor's love of cosmic horror and Lovecraftian creatures and my terror and isolation that was happening during the early pandemic.
It's interesting because, I mean, some of those fears, those natural fears that we had during the pandemic, feeling alone, isolated, not sure of the state of the world, that's not just centered on the States or in the UK. That's across the globe, right? I think even now, I think there's still countries that are still in that thrall, as it were.
Right.
The UK is going through some political upheaval right now. You've got Ukraine and Russia over in Europe. There's been another shooting in the States. And then, of course, the legality of abortion came into question last week. So, for a lot of people, I've heard this said before. Some people miss the pandemic,
right?
Because they were in their bubble, they were protected,
right? Yeah, I think there was a lot of it. It just changed how we look at things. It changed who we think of as being in our inner circle because you spent, it's kind of like when you move to a smaller space and you don't unpack half of your belongings, you realize you don't need them. Like if you don't touch them for 3 years, you probably don't need to keep them. And certain relationships feel like that. Like there's family members that you don't see as often, you don't talk to as much. There's friends that you don't interact with. You missed out. And then now we're all supposed to go back to how things were, and it feels wrong. Yeah. And I think you're right. I think a lot of that that frustration and that isolation and the vilification of anyone who disagrees with us or the othering that went on, that has spread out over everything. And like people are angrier. People are more quick to attack. And we there's a lot of that in the book. There's a lot of that in Hard Eyes because it takes place after the apocalypse. Like it's several years later. People aren't actively being killed by these monsters. Society's been destroyed, but everyone still lives in that intensity and they don't trust anything. There's a sort
of symbiosis, isn't there? The fact that the humans know what to do to live their lives, whilst not angering the monsters, and the monsters are just doing what monsters do.
Yeah, and Lupe says at one point in the book, like everybody wishes there were still people, like all the people went away, but when they meet a new person, they just want to kill them because they don't trust them. And that definitely stems from how the world felt and still feels since the pandemic.
It's crazy that we have like that. Just for the record, I'm sure Dennis didn't mean to say that when you don't touch your comic books for 3 years, you should get rid of them, right?
No,
keep your comic books.
Yes. Well, I think most comic book readers are also collectors, and so we don't necessarily ditch anything that we have collected.
Tell me about it. The amount of bad runs of books I've got just because I can't stop buying the damn thing. Oh,
well, it's funny. I always told myself that my kids, my kids will love it though. If my dad had all his comics from when he was a kid, I would have dug through that and loved it. But my kids don't read anything on paper. Like everything's on the iPad, so they just want everything digitally, and they don't care. They probably aren't even aware that I have long boxes in the basement full of books.
There's a guy at work, Liam, who is a bit of a comic book fan on the down low, right? So we've been talking about the Amazing Spider-Man book that's kicking around right now, and he's got digital versions of them. Well, I was in my local comic book shop, and I picked number 1 was still there, so I picked it up and I gave it to him as a gift.
Right.
And honestly, the look of joy on his faces is actually turning the pages and just going, "Wow, how good does this look?" I'm like, dude, this is me every week. Yeah, so.
It is a lot more fun. I got, especially when I started working heavily at Marvel, they send you all of the books every month, so you get all these free digital comics in PDF form. And I switched to reading so much stuff just on my laptop because it was, research for work or something a friend had sent me or something a publisher had sent me. And when I do actually go buy comics and have the physical, it is much more fun. Or even digging through my own back issues and pulling out stuff from college or whatever that I read. There's something visceral about it. But I wonder if my kids' generation, if young people will have any connection to paper like that, because so much of what they do, at school, at home, everything is digital. I wonder if they'll ever care the way we do.
I hope so. Because there's something intrinsic about holding a book. I still like reading the clip notes in the CD. So what do I know?
Right.
So you started off independently,
yeah,
and then you kind of moved to Image, which is still classed as an independent, but is it really?
Right. No.
And then over on to Marvel. So you're on Vault Comics now.
Mm-hmm.
Vault Comics, I think, are one of, I keep saying up and coming, and I don't mean it in like the brand new because they've been around a few years, but they don't flood the market with product. They go for quality over quantity.
Yes.
How did you get involved with Vault?
So my indie career before Marvel was very limited. I did a book called Gearhead at Arcana, and then Kevin Mellon, my good friend and the artist on that, and I developed another series that we were going to do through AIT. And while we were making it, AIT went out of business. And so that ended up coming out as an Image book, but it was just because we had a completed graphic novel and nowhere to take it. And Kevin was doing another Image book, so it came out there. And then in between those two series, I did like 15 different pitches and false starts and different comic book projects that were supposed to go somewhere and didn't for one of the various reasons. And I was frustrated because Kevin was finishing up Lovestruck, our Image book, and I had done all the stuff that didn't go anywhere. And I felt like, okay, I've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. Am I ever going to make a living? Am I ever going to make $1 doing comics? So I chopped up a few sample pages from all of the different dead projects, made logos, pretended like they had publishers upcoming, and sent those to editors at Marvel and DC because they're not allowed to look at it if it's not published. So I pretended they all had publishers. And
previews is 2 months in ahead, right? So it's like, it's in previews. It's in previews. Check it out.
Exactly. Anyway, so sent that out, and then like 10 months later, a Marvel editor at the time, Alejandro Arbona, called me and was like, "Hey, I've had your sample sitting on my desk forever, and I was cleaning my desk off and actually flipped through it. Would you want to pitch something?" And that led to X-Men Season 1 and Legion of Monsters and some of my early Marvel work. And then I'm just not that fast. So Marvel kept me fed and busy, like from that point almost straight through to the pandemic. And I had some percolating creator-owned books, and I did Sea of Stars with Jason Aaron, but I only had to write half of it, so I was able to do that at the same time. And so when Pencils Down happened, I was kind of freaking out about what to do with myself and feeling a little bit worthless. And so I started digging out those creator-owned ideas I'd been developing and reaching out to former collaborators to see if anybody wanted to do anything, and developed 2 books. And one of them was Hard Eyes with Victor. And I didn't know, like, it had been so long since I had really played the creator-owned game. I was just looking for the right home for it. And I saw some tweet or something or other about Barbaric, which is one of Vault's most successful books. It looked really cool and looked like the kind of thing I'd be into. And then I saw Alex Packnadell was doing a book with them. I know Alex. Yeah, he's a great guy.
What a great guy.
So I reached out to him and I said, "Hey, what's the deal? Is Vault good?" And he sang their praises quickly and loudly. And so, yeah, I reached out, and Adrian, it turns out, was a fan of my Spider-Woman run and was super excited to work with us and loved the pitch. So it turns out, now that I know more about Vault, now that I've worked with them, it's the perfect place to take a creator-owned book, especially like this. They're, like you said, they don't flood the market with titles. They're very particular and careful. It's all sort of like off kilter, weird genre bending stuff.
Yeah.
Somebody called them the A24 of comics on Twitter the other day. And I think that's a perfect analogy, because they just, the books are connected by being a little bit weird, a little bit outside the norm, but really high quality, beautiful art, interesting stories. So yeah, I'm thrilled. I love working with Vault, and we'll continue.
When you look at Vault's like history of books, you meant Berserker. You've got I've just gone blank. Ram V's book. My mind's just gone blank. Something Shores, the Hidden Shores.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So Ram V's moved his Vault. They went Swamp Thing. They went Catwoman. Alex Packnadle has been indie writer. Vault. Then he moves into doing like some of the one shots for Marvel for some of their event stuff. It seems to me that Marvel and DC as well are kind of looking at the indie creator-owned writers to say, you know what, because you can write something that's a little off kilter,
right?
Can you bring that to our mainstream characters? Because you know what, people are getting a little bit, Batman's getting a little bit long in the ears,
right?
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So that's good. So what was it like working with Victor again? Because I mean, Victor's a long-time collaborator with Spider-Woman. So how was that getting back into the flow? You've kind of had your pencils down moment. You see the character we've got going on there, and then how do you get the kind of like back into rhythm with working with an artist?
Yeah, when we had time, but because there was no deadline. The hard thing about working at Marvel is usually by the time you're talking with your collaborator, talking with the artist, there's already a deadline for the first issue, and you're off to the races. And Victor and I had a great experience working together on Jean Grey, but it was like that. Like it was very much running a relay race back and forth for all 12 issues. And so with this, we were able to kind of toss ideas back and forth. I remember I sent him multiple drafts of a plot outline and what he wanted to put in the book and what I was bringing to the book. And so by the time we had a publisher and a script ready to go, we'd been talking for 6 months about it. And Victor he's insanely talented. He draws the most elaborate, detailed pages, and he puts them all in perfect perspective with like all of the buildings, like all of the architecture's there, everything's there.
Well, we're looking right there. I mean, that's just if you can see, it's inspired by your kids. It must be, because it looks like it's a cell phone.
Yes,
cell phone screen, and look at the detail of the building here behind the word bubbles.
And it's every panel, definitely. I wrote a page, or I guess a scene in one of the later issues that takes place in a bookstore, which is like, that's a punt for most artists. You draw a bookstore in one background panel, and then you do void panels for the rest of them. He drew the most beautiful, like used bookstore in every panel, where you can see all of the books and the architecture, and the bookshelves are beautiful. And
the titles are the same in the right order.
Exactly. So he does that with the depth. But then when you zoom in and do a facial expression shot, like this kid in the second panel there
you go.
He nails all of the expression. The acting is amazing. Like his characters just jump out of the page. And then what I didn't really know, because there wasn't a lot of it on Jean Grey, he could draw the craziest batshit monsters as well, and just these terrifying creatures that are eating people's sanity. And so he's just a joy to work with. He sends me the little sculpture photos. Sometimes he'll sculpt the tentacle monsters or whatever out of clay and wrap them around action figures in order to get the perspective right. And he just puts so much work and love into every page. So it's been amazing.
Excellent. You're absolutely right. I think for a book like this, you've got to feel the environment, right?
Yes.
You've got to feel it. You can't. It's not just it's not just a run-of-the-mill city. You've got to see that it's a derelict city. You've got to see the kind of impact that the apocalypse has had on this. And of course, you've got to have some of that emotional aspects. I'm not going to show the exact panel, because you know what? I want you to go out and buy the book. Exactly. But there is this lovely panel where we meet the the female character. Forgive my pronunciation. Lupe. Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm British. I screw up everybody's name. I'm basically I can remember mine some of the time. So there's this bit in the page where we're introduced to Lupe, and she's walking along, and you can see the emotional transition she goes through.
Yeah.
Which is part of the hook for previews in relation to the character, and I'm kind of, it's like it works so well. You consider it's just a 1-page introduction to this character.
Yeah,
You feel what she feels right until the point she starts smiling,
right,
and then you're like, what is she smiling for?
Right. Yeah, that's the big question mark at the first issue is, first of all, how does she survive on the road alone in this world? And then, like, why is she smiling?
Yeah, no spoilers. That's on previews. Go check it out.
But yeah, he nails all that stuff. And I knew that, I am a weird superhero writer in that I love the character interaction. I love to make the situations as relatable as I can, despite the fact that these people's lives aren't relatable at all. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I remember there's a scene early in our Jean Grey run where I have Jean Grey sitting in Japan eating ramen, and just the facial expressions he gave her while she's like experiencing what's going around and eating food. I'm like, okay, I want to work with this guy forever. Because he does it, and the art is beautiful. He nails his expressions, but it also is just like big and weighted in existent space, and it's just incredible. The book doesn't need me to sell it. Like, if he could put it out as just an art book, and I think it would be worth double the cover price because it's phenomenal. And then Addison, our colorist, is the perfect person on top of him. He's not doing too much, but he gives mood and tone to every page. He makes the flashbacks that kind of exist within.
Flashbacks work well.
Yeah, this is really obvious what's in the past and what's not. It's a really gorgeous book.
Definitely, and I think when we look at the colors, we talk a lot about how colors create the vibe, the emotion of the scenes. That washed out kind of green look that they go for the back for the past sequences.
Right.
It absolutely gorgeous, and there's a scene, and we'll talk about it off camera if we have to. But there's a scene of Lupe's past where I thought the conversation was going one way, and it was the complete opposite, and I was absolutely amazed. I was like, wow! Even though all the details on the page, I didn't see that conversation going there.
Right.
So that's a credit to you for kind of like making sure that I'm being introduced to things as I go. Because I've been reading, I'm a little bit grey in the hair, as you might notice. So I've been reading comics a while. It's hard to pull the wool over my eyes.
Right. No, I credit all of that to Victor. I do a lettering draft after the art is done, where I make sure and change the dialogue, make sure the pacing works, move stuff around. And the book really became something else after it was drawn, because he put so much great acting onto the page that you kind of see it differently. It's a different take than what I wrote in the script. And that scene in particular, where he pulls you through it, and I guess we can't say what it is, but he pulls you through it so that you believe one thing, and then once you realize it's something else, it's all there. Yeah.
I mean, I think you're doing yourself a disservice, Dennis. I've got to be honest, man. I think some of the, you said it's Lovecraftian Romeo Juliet story based after the apocalypse. The Romeo and Juliet that I know doesn't seem quite as desperate to need to love as a couple of these characters.
Right.
And I think that's going to, obviously not spoil anything because I have no idea what's going to happen, but that's obviously going to change how they look at the worldview. And that's one of the contrasts that occurs during the characters. As you said, this person wants one thing, whereas everybody else doesn't trust anybody. So it's like that clash of intent and belief, definitely.
Yeah, both characters they're desperate for human interaction. Like, they're desperate for a little bit of normalcy, and neither one of them have really experienced it. In Lupe's case, partially because of how she grew up and where she comes from, and then the secrets we'll learn later. Yeah. But from Rico's perspective, he's just the only person his age that he's known since he was a kid. He's been protected by his family, and sort of carried the weight of being the one that had to be protected. And now as he's coming into, manhood, he doesn't want to wear that anymore. And he wants to go live his own life. But the only reason he exists is that he was protected by his older family members. And so he meets this girl, and she's everything. She's the opportunity that he's always wanted. Like, she's normal life. And that is a lot to put on a one-day relationship.
Well, we've all been there.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. That first girlfriend's the girlfriend you're going to marry, right? Every time.
Yeah. And that's devastating when it goes the other way, right?
Yeah, totally. I apologize to my first girlfriend if that was the intention. Sorry. It was a while ago. I'll be fine. Yeah. Probably not even into comics anymore, bless her. That's cool. One more question before we take a quick break. There is a lot of focus on diverse characters right now, which there should be, because the world is a diverse place. I totally get that. Recently, DC had their new version of Wonder Woman, who promptly got demoted to Wonder Girl.
Right.
Yeah, well done, DC. But she's a diverse character who has a similar bearing as Lupe. Do you think that diverse characters... first of all, yes, they should be around. Do you feel the attraction for diverse characters is a lot greater now? Do diverse characters create diverse readerships? There you go.
I hope so. I think it's important that we think about it, because in comics everything was super white for the most part for 100 years. So it's good that we think about it. I think oftentimes when we try to fix those things, our first attempts are maybe a little ham-fisted. So it feels like it's gotten a little bit more realistic and relaxed now.
Yeah, organic.
It is organic. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Yeah, it has gotten a little bit more organic, because I think just people don't immediately assume every person in the script is white. In this case, Lupe is a character that was created by Victor before I came on board. Like, we figured out the story together, but he had already drawn her, and Victor's Spanish, so I don't know where he came up with her heritage, but yeah. So, and then beyond that, and so we find out a little bit of Lupe's past later, which I won't get into. But she's Mexican American, I think, is the implication. And then Rico's family.
It's San Antonio, isn't it? It's based in San Antonio, so there's going to be a lot of diversity in that. You know, San Antonio is a diverse place. It's not just one thing or the other.
Yeah, and then Rico and his family, I didn't specify. So Victor just drew what he drew.
Cool.
And the downside of that for a long time is if you didn't specify, you were going to end up with a bunch of white characters. Because it's just what popped into people's heads, and I don't think that's the case anymore, which I guess is what I'm saying when I say it's more organic. But yeah, I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing.
Agreed.
We've got plenty of decades of all white comic books out there.
Indeed, we have. All right, time for a quick break. Where shall we go? See, you've worked on Marvel, so I'm tempted to go Marvel. But I like the DC advert. Tell you what, why don't we have a bit of both? Check this out. Crisis in the Toyverse. There you go, Crisis in the Toyverse for all you figure fans. whatever you do, don't let Victor see that because he'll start wrapping technicals around all sorts of crazy figures. And I quite like John Wick as he is. Thank you very much.
He absolutely would.
Can you imagine John Wick versus Tentacle Monster?
I was sad when I learned that Victor takes apart the sculpture when he's done with it. Because I liked the idea that he had all of these things surrounding him on shelves, but no, apparently.
Oh, just do it, man. Just think of the con pieces you could do. It's like, yeah, there you go. It's a Victor original. There you go. Yeah. You can just imagine. Excuse me, why is Mysterio being? Yeah, well, illusion went wrong. What you expect? All right, excellent. Okay, so we're going to take a bit of a detour now.
Sure.
We mentioned her before, Spider-Woman, one of my favorite books that came out of Marvel at that time. The thing that I liked about your writing on Spider-Woman was the humor, which I don't normally like because I think sometimes, and I'm not going to ask you to comment on this because I don't want you to burn any bridges or anything. I sometimes feel there's an editorial quota in Marvel that every book has to be funny,
right?
And I'm like, you know what, that works for characters like, I don't know, Black Cat, Spider-Woman, Spider-Man. Right. Doesn't work so well with Ghost Rider.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting balance, and I think some of that now I think comes from the MCU. Like, in the comic books, Doctor Strange wasn't quippy, but then we get a quippy Doctor Strange in the movies because it's kind of the tone of the movies, right?
Yeah, it's plug and play. When we talk about movies, me and my friends, they'll say, "Oh, DC movies aren't as good as Marvel." I'll say, "Yeah, but Marvel's plug and play." They'll say, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, you can just take any character out of a Marvel movie, replace it with another character from any other Marvel movie, and things will be tickety-boo. You won't even notice."
Right.
At least DC has different tones.
There's like a style to it, right? There's like a dialogue style that, it takes an interesting story or a really good actor to find some nuance in that, I think. Anyway, and that is a challenge at writing superhero comics too, because you want them to be fun and you want some levity in there. But a character like Jessica Drew made it really easy because she's not trying to be funny. She's just really irritated all the time because she's impatient and surrounded by idiots. And so mostly she's just taking her frustrations out verbally on, in our book, like moronic C and D level street level Spider-Man villains.
I like the determination you had, because when the book first came out, Spider-Man was into the whole Spider-Verse thing.
Yes.
And it felt like that first series, our first few issues, couldn't get any traction.
Right.
Because it was like, this is the first issue about Jessica Drew. Oh, and now you've got to read all these books to get to the second. And that kind of felt like the way the book was.
Yeah, that is exactly what inspired where we went. Because, they wanted me to launch the book during Spider-Verse. And I thought, what I was sold is, this is going to be a huge event. Everybody's going to want to buy all the tie-ins, and your book will launch during that. So more people will give it a shot. And that seemed smart. And so what I thought was, okay, give me all the continuity, and I will make a very Spider-Verse first arc where everything Jessica does is tied into Dan's plot and this and that. And the problem with that is you're working from like a story Bible of an event that shifts and changes as the writer writes the actual issues. And so I was dancing between raindrops that were moving around.
Yeah.
And not only that, but like you said, it's not just a story. Like, she's in it, but it's the story of all these other things. And it only really makes sense if you've read a bunch of other comics elsewhere. So it was extremely frustrating. And the reviews made it clear that it was frustrating for readers too. And so when we got to issue 5, which was the first issue afterward, I'm like, to hell with crossover events, to hell with the Avengers, like to hell with all of the complicated shit. And that was Jess's attitude. Like, I'm tired of having my whole life be stuff I can't explain to anyone because it's so nonsensical. I want to help people. I want to live a regular life. But Jessica Drew has never had a regular life. Like, if you look at her backstory, that she didn't have a childhood, she doesn't know how to be normal.
She doesn't have regular continuity, never mind a regular life.
Right, exactly. So she doesn't know how to do it, and she's bad at it. She's really good at saving the universe. She's really bad at like making coffee and being normal. So having her try to be street level was a fun challenge for her and frustrating. And like from that point on, I feel like we found our audience and found our footing and knew what to do with the character. But then Secret Wars happened. And so we ran into Secret Wars, and the mandate of Secret Wars is every book stops because the universe has crashed together and everything stopped. And then afterward, there's an 8-month later jump where you've got to do something huge has to change in your book during that time period, right? And at the time, I had like 5 or 6 month old twins at home, my first kids. And I was like, let's 8 months, like let's just make her pregnant.
What can happen in 8 months? Let's see.
Exactly. And my editor was like, okay, that's hilarious. No, what are we gonna do for real? But during Secret Wars, you had to you had to be plotting what was going to happen afterward while also writing whatever miniseries you were assigned. And I was doing House of M Secret Wars, which is a story that took place in the House of M universe.
Yep.
And then I did the Inferno one. And so I was so busy and I had babies that I never came up with another idea. So
after deadline day came and you're like, still that one, there you go.
Right. Yeah. So we went into this Marvel retreat with all the writers and editors get together and figure out what's going on. And it was going to be time after lunch to pitch Spider-Woman. And Nick and I hadn't even really discussed it since that one phone call. And fortunately, at the Spider-Man lunch, I was there with Bendis and Dan Slott and Nick. I pitched the pregnancy idea again, and Dan and Bendis were both like, "That's a great idea, absolutely." And so then Nick was like, "Okay, fine, pitch it to the room," and the room loved it. And fortunately, I think we fit in because Marvel doesn't own the movie rights to Jessica Drew, Sony does, and because Spider-Gwen was kicking off as well. It was a thing where we can age the character up a little bit and it's not going to be so detrimental. Like, they're not so worried about making it seem like she's perpetually 21. And it was something that they'd never really done before. You know, the characters had children before, but they never leaned into the parenthood of it and how it changes their life. So yeah, we carved out a really interesting niche to tell a story, a parenthood story that you haven't seen a lot of in comics. And from what you were saying, having that drama, like having the weight of risking your life every night, even though you have a kid to go back home to and you're not getting any sleep and you've got all this real life stuff to deal with, it let us tell really fun 70s Marvel style street action stuff where Jess isn't saving the world. She's like beating up idiots. And that is super fun. And she's taking her, you know, like her motherhood frustrations out on, Big Wheel or whoever.
I'm not surprised. Let's do something interesting. You said Nick. Is that Nick Spencer?
Nick Lowe.
Nick Lowe, right, cool. So, what was I going to say there? So, the idea, I love the idea of teaming Jess up with Ben Urich.
Yeah.
Where did that come? That feels like out of left field. I remember what I was going to say now. I'm not surprised Bendis was all for the pregnancy thing because obviously his character, Jessica Jones, has little toddler as well, doesn't she? So
yes,
that's fine. So sorry. So Ben Urich, where that seems really out of left field from someone who maybe doesn't, for fans who don't know. But of course, Ben has a history of running with the superheroes because he's Matt Murdock's best pal, or one of them. That came from Nick Lowe, the editor, and at the time, it hadn't been that long, or maybe Daredevil, the Netflix show, was still going on. And I think they just didn't have a space for Ben in any of the other books. And so he suggested it. And I thought initially it was like, he's a newspaper guy and newspapers are dying. So we ended up making that a plot point where Ben realizes that his vocation isn't as powerful as it once was, but he has all of these stories, these folders full of stories that he's wanted to go after. And there's not really like the bandwidth for it. So he instead like starts working with Jessica and like, here, let's solve these cases. Let's figure out what's going on here, which gave us a lot of fun, weird storylines to play with. Well, Ben's always been the moral center, hasn't he? Of a lot of characters. He's that guy that says, the reason why you're doing this, look out for the little guy and all that sort of stuff. Of course, you also created a monster in the relationship between Jess and Roger. Yeah, and I have to say it was the sweetest thing. I absolutely, when he got to the end, he was getting threatened by Hobgoblin. I was like, I was telling my friends, do not throw Roger off a bridge. Do not. I'm sure that probably kept you. I mean, you thought about it, didn't you? You're like, should we throw him off the GW bridge just to see what happens? Let's see. Yeah?
I mean, he sort of gets blasted off of the building, right? Yeah, that happened completely organically. I like Porcupine's costume, and so I love putting him in the background of things. So he's in an issue of Avengers Arena. We put him in Avengers Undercover, just because I love the costume and I love seeing different artists' interpretation of it. Cool. So when we did the first arc coming out of Secret Wars, no, it was the first arc coming out of Spider-Verse, right? The first one. I wanted that town where the wives and girlfriends of supervillains like get together and start extorting them. I wanted all the supervillains to like be weird, obscure, cool costume characters. So that's why Roger was in there. But yeah, Porcupine's my favorite character. It's my favorite costume. So I had her fight him first, and then I don't know what possessed me to have her tie him to a radiator. And they have a conversation about how she doesn't have any bowls. Yeah. And that they were just so fun together. Like, I kind of wrote him like the dude from The Big Lebowski, and he everything he said irritated Jessica so delightfully that their dialogue was really fun, which is why I kept him around for that arc. And then that relationship just kind of grew organically. And then, because I loved him so much in those first how many ever issues before Secret Wars, when we came out of Secret Wars, I'm like, I need a reason for Roger to still be in the book. So this whole idea that Roger would be the superhero of the team while she was on maternity leave kind of started. And then I realized, like, I didn't plot them falling in love. I realized he was in love with her while I was writing it. Cool. And that led to those later storylines.
Cool. Let me ask you a quick question about Jess and Love. Before we have one more question before we move on to Jean Grey, so the penultimate question, I guess. Jess and Love. There's a lot of fan love for the idea of Jess with Carol Danvers.
Yes.
Do you think there's longevity in that idea down the line? Because it wasn't that long ago in the Captain Marvel book, Carol dumped Rhodey.
Right.
And you're like, I mean, admittedly, it only lasted for about an issue and a half. But Carla Pacheco had already broke up Jess and Roger by that point.
Right.
And everyone's like, ooh, what's going to happen? You know, do you think, I mean, you see how well the relationship between Harley and Ivy, for example, work.
Right.
Do you think there's longevity in the idea of Jess and Carol?
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all. It's definitely there in the fan base. We got a lot of that. There's a joke in the book about how the internet thinks it's Carol's baby, but I think that.
So let me ask you a second question on the back of that. Do you wish that you got to tell that story, or are you all pro Jess and Roger?
No, like I said, Rod, that wasn't an idea I had. It was just something that happened in the book that I went with.
All over.
We talked about it because, you know, the internet is very loud about that, and I have a lot of great Spider-Woman fans that reached out and talked to me over the years, and many of them love that idea. And we didn't dissuade that. Like they clearly love each other, and they clearly have an extremely strong relationship in the book. I suspect Marvel will become more and more amenable to that sort of thing going forward. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if they head in that direction at some point.
I mean, I was lucky. I've been absolutely lucky. My wife, for my 50th birthday. Yes, 50, I know. I'm looking well. She bought me Avengers Annual number 10, which is where Rogue zaps Carol Danvers of her powers, right? But the end of the book, Jess and Carol are sitting holding hands by a swimming pool, right? And that's like Avengers Annual number 10,
right?
So, you know, I think there's some history in that.
No, it's definitely there. It's there in the subtext. The early Spider-Woman stories, it's there in the subtext too. Like her sexuality is definitely open for interpretation, let's say.
Cool. One more thing about Spider-Woman before we move on. Costume changes at the time were all the rage. I remember reviewing one of your Spider-Woman books, and I'd said something along the lines of, I'm going off memory here, so apologies. Was the artist Javier Rodriguez?
Yes.
See how I pulled that out without even looking at my notes. You know, that's how much of a fan I am. Thanks. Yeah.
Awesome.
Cool.
Well done.
Thank you. And I said that Javier had Batgirled, because this was after the Burnside of Batgirl of Burnside character had come out, had effectively Batgirl Spider-Woman, but more effectively than they'd done it with Batgirl.
Right.
Was this kind of like a conscious idea to change the costume up from the traditional red and yellow? Because that had some negative connotations at the time as well, thanks to a certain cover.
Yeah. Weirdly, before the cover came out, the infamous Spider-Woman butt cover came out, we had already planned on changing the costume design, and Chris Anka had done the redesign. And so from the time Javi was starting on the book after Spider-Verse, he was always headed in that direction.
All right, sweet.
And then that cover, because what happened is they had to solicit the book before any of the main covers were done. Yeah. And so in previews, it put the Milo Manara cheesecake butt cover front and center. So it looked like that's what we were doing with the book. Yeah. And in reality, like those covers
different.
Right. Yeah. Those covers were for a very specific collector's audience.
Yeah.
And it was not intended to be front and center, but so it was actually kind of nice that we had already had this plan and everything was ready to go. But yeah, when issue 5 came out and people saw the costume change, they just assumed it was in reaction to that, but it wasn't. But yeah, Nick Lowe, the editor, wanted to change the costume. He didn't like the orange yellow triangle pointing down. That made him he thought it sexualized the character, and we were doing a street level thing, so it made sense to give her more of a armor kind of thing.
I would like to point out at this point, it's not the arrow that sexualizes the character, it's the hips and the breasts that do that, but never mind.
Yes.
The arrow's the thing people are looking at, really? Come on. All right. At least on that iteration of Spider-Man, of course. All right. Moving forward, let's talk a little bit about Jean Grey. So Jean Grey is the book where you and Victor were working together. For those that don't remember, this is young Jean Grey. This is the X-Men original team had been pulled from the past and stuck in modern times. Now, the art style, Victor's art style, doesn't scream mutant mayhem.
No.
Right?
Yeah.
Did you find that when the book was out and people were picking up, did that cause a lot of confusion for people? Because when people hear Jean Grey, they expect a certain thing, right? Again, it's very much like here's Spider-Woman, you expect the red and the yellow.
Right. So it was an interesting change because I took over All New X-Men from Bendis, and his story had been the teenage original X-Men were brought into the present, and to them, the present is like Days of Future Past. It's not post-apocalyptic, but dystopian. And so I had taken over that story, but my All New X-Men didn't have Jean Grey in it because she was on the Extraordinary X-Men team that Lemire was writing. And we all got, I don't remember how many issues, we all got long runs on those X books. And then Avengers versus Inhumans happened. Yep. And they had the idea to kind of shake up the X line and we could all do different books. And I was really jonesing to write Jean Grey because I love Jean Grey. And she was the one character that was missing in my All New X-Men. And then my very first Marvel book was X-Men Season 1, where we take the original X-Men stories and tell them from Jean's perspective. So I was really excited to write Teenage Jean Grey again. And so I think Victor's art style was perfect for that because it wasn't an X-Men book. It was a spotlight on Jean, right? Like it was Jean, teenage Jean has heard all the stories about what happened to her adult self and the Phoenix and Dark Phoenix and dying and all of the turmoil and starts to feel the pull of the Phoenix and is terrified. Like I'm not, like the other me was older when this happened and killed a planet and went insane. Like, what am I going to do? Yeah. And nobody believes her. Like everybody thinks it's a boogeyman and that it's not real. And so we were able to have Jean kind of bounce around the Marvel universe and learn from different characters, like in a sort of training montage is what the book was to prepare for the coming of the Phoenix. Right. And yeah, I think Victor's art style being a little bit different and a little more cinematic, and like we said earlier, like his facial expressions and everything feeling really three-dimensional.
Yep.
Made it seem different. Like it wasn't an X-Men cartoon. It was a character study of this young girl going through something crazy. And then what's wild about that book is our intention was not to lead into the return of Jean Grey. We didn't know that was happening. And we were on issue 9 of 11 or something whenever those plans solidified. And so they're like, okay, you got 2 issues now, dovetail into this thing that you didn't know was going to happen. And I had to completely rewrite at least 1 issue, maybe 2 issues that were already scripted. But it was great because it made this little story we were telling seem really big, because it seemed like the whole point was to lead into the return of the Phoenix, the return of Jean Grey. So yeah, it's an odd little side project book that probably not a lot of people have read, but I'm really proud of it. And I think Victor's perfect for it.
Did you find, because the idea is that the original X-Men, the X-Teens, we'll call them the X-Teens from the past into the present, at some point they have to go back.
Right.
Did you find that idea of them having to go back hanging over you was like the sword of Damocles, just waiting to like go whoosh?
Yeah, it was a strange thing because it doesn't make practical sense, right? Like they've changed so much that you couldn't just send them back. And actually at the end of my All New X-Men run, they try to go back and they're already there. Like get there's other versions of them there, which we were creating the question mark of like, did they create a rift? Is there like an alternate timeline that's been created by this, or what's going on? And I feel like Cullen Bunn and X-Men Blue addressed some of that more and made that even more complicated.
I actually forgot Cullen was on that.
Yeah. But yeah, it was a weird, because I think initially it was supposed to be a short-lived storyline. Like Bendis was going to bring him back. They were going to teach the modern X-Men that what they were doing was not like was scary to their past selves, and then they were going to go back, and it just didn't ever happen. So it was definitely an odd thing about writing those characters, but it was fun to take those super white bread characters and give them a modern perspective. It allowed us to get, Iceman's homosexuality was something we got to play with, and Scott dealing with the fact that adult Scott got real militant and dark and was heading in scary places. Like that was a fun storyline to write. So yeah, it was odd. It was definitely an odd era to be part of the X-Men.
Right, excellent. Okay, back to Heart Eyes. We missed somebody a little bit off our credits. I'm on a bit of a hill at the moment on Twitter. You might see it, you might not, but I'm a big fan, and this is a credit to Vault Comics. So round of applause for Vault. But it really annoys me when letterers don't get cover credits.
Yeah, they absolutely should.
Absolutely. And you've got one of the best on Heart Eyes, and Simon Borland.
He's amazing. And not only that, but Simon bent over backwards to get this first issue done because I did not properly communicate with Vault that I wanted to do a lettering draft. So he had to letter it twice, and he did it in record time, and it is gorgeous. And I will always owe Simon for making that happen. Because he's fantastic. So
I've seen it on the Amazing Spider-Man book. The letterers getting the credit, but that, from all the books I see on a regular basis, that's the only one that Marvel gets a letter credit on the cover. DC takes it even worse. DC didn't even give letter credits to I think it's Rob Lee on the Doomsday Clock.
That's crazy.
That's like in the book. Didn't give him.
It's not even in the lettering.
Yeah. It's like why? I get, and I get it. People aren't going to go rush into a comic book store and go, "Oh, look, Clayton Cowles, I'm going to get by that." Or, "Oh, look, Taylor Esposito." I get it. It's not the first thing you think of, but if a lettering job is done poorly, it spoils the whole comic.
It really does, and a fantastic letterer can add so much to the readability and to the dialogue, how it works, and sound effects, just like how the eye moves across the page. They have a really important job, and they're always dead last. So when we get behind, and we're always behind, they have to do it super fast. So they are the unsung heroes of every comic book, and should absolutely be credited.
Perfect. Hey, job done. My hill is Sanif. All right. So if you want to follow Dennis on Twitter, there you go, at Hopeless Dent.
Yes.
Check that out for updates on Heart Eyes. Fantastic. And of course, you've got your Instagram there, which is Dennis Hopeless Comics.
Yes.
Cool. Excellent. For those who are thinking, where can I get this book? Well, this book is, let me get you some details. It is in the current, it's in the May previews world. All right.
Yes.
Your code, should you be wanting to take this mission, is the word May. So M for Mike, A for Alpha, Y for Yankee. And the cover by Victor Ibanez, sorry, I know I've said it wrong, is 221843. There are variant covers out there. Just change the last digit and you'll be able to get in there. All right.
Yes.
The book is due out on August 17th. So you have plenty of time to toddle off down to your local comic book shop, put in your order before FOC, get in there, get it on Comixology if that's your thing. Don't get it off Comixology. Go to the shop and buy the proper thing, right? So you put it in your hand. Yeah.
Please talk to your retailer. Like if you any indie book, any book that's not Marvel and DC, if you want it, the best thing you can do for that, to get it for yourself and for that creative team, is to go talk to retailers, because they have so many different products every month that they have to sift through, and they will miss stuff if their customers don't point it out. So yes, please ask your retailer for the book.
There you go. Get down there. Go on the hot rate. I've told you the number. What more do you want? Just get it done. Dennis, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you. You know, you've made this this somewhat jaded at times comic book fan really happy. Thank you very much for taking time out of your really busy schedule to talk to me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a blast.
Excellent. All right, that's it for this episode of Outside the Panels. Don't forget to check out the UCPN for all your favorite shows, including The Crisis in the Toyverse. And if Marvel's your bag, don't forget to check out the No Prize podcast. For DC fans, that's the Definitive Crusade. And for those that like their comics a little bit indie, well then, you can always head over to the Flip Side Focus, where you'll see me and Josh talking about all sorts of indie books. You never know, you might get another look at this book. Just don't tell Dennis that I've showed you any more pages, right?
Right.
All right. I've been your host, Joining the Machine, Hughes. Dennis, once more, thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
All right. And for everyone else, we're out of here. Adios.
Visit undercovercapes.com for the latest and greatest podcasts via the Undercover Capes Podcast Network. Also visit our parent company website, comiccrusaders.com, all about comic pop culture.